I still remember the rumble of bulldozers, the clanking of metal against stone, and the roar of trucks barreling down the quiet country lane. It was an early morning in late spring when I first witnessed the heavy machinery carving up the old gravel road. That same road had led to my family's ancestral home for 4 generations. For a moment, I couldn't believe my eyes. My ancestral lakefront, tranquil and protected for as long as I could recall, was about to become some glossy resort playground for the privileged from the crest of the hill. I watched in stunned silence as the construction crew uprooted a line of willow trees. Those willows had swayed gently by the lake since my grandfather was a child. My dog Rusty padded nervously at my side, sensing my agitation. The whirring sound of drills and the beep-beep of reversing trucks ground against my ears. How had this happened, and so swiftly? My name is Samuel Norris, a man not usually known to shy away from conflict. But I had chosen a quieter life recently, wanting to protect my family's land after my father's passing. I also carried a secret. I was a federal judge, and not just any judge. One who had sent more than a few corrupt officials and shady businessmen to jail. I was well versed in the art of the legal takedown, though few in this sleepy town realized the full extent of my authority. When I inherited our estate, I told no one of my position in the federal judiciary, hoping to live a simpler existence that honored my father's legacy. Even when I first heard rumors of a development project coming in, I kept my identity hidden. I believed in the fairness of the system, that any honest citizen with legitimate rights over their land would be protected. But I must confess, I was naive. In that moment, as the first scoop of dirt was lifted from our precious soil, I sensed that the usual path, filing complaints through local zoning boards, calling out the city inspectors, wasn't going to be enough. I had read about the new property manager for the local homeowners association, a woman named HOA. She was rumored to be cunning, charismatic, and absolutely ruthless when it came to seizing properties for development. The idea that a single HOA official had the power to shape or break entire communities infuriated me. Looking down at the construction site, I saw her short, impeccably dressed in a tailored business suit, wearing mirrored sunglasses that reflected the bright morning sun. Even from the distance, I noticed the sharpness in her stance, the set of her jaw. She stood with a small entourage, each person scribbling notes on clipboards. They paused often to converse in hushed tones, presumably conferring about the next phase of their project. Before her crews broke ground, they had bulldozed the old chain-link fence that marked the boundary of my property. That fence had once been a relic from my grandfather's time, slightly rusted, sure, but no less a testament to our rightful domain. Yet there they were, demolishing it with impunity, as though it was nothing more than a nuisance in the way of their swanky new luxury hotel. In that instant, my emotions clashed. I felt the burning impulse to storm down there and halt the machinery by sheer force of will, but I also knew the real power would come from a calculated response. As a judge, a single precise stroke could be far more devastating to wrongdoing than 1,000 wild blows. I gazed across the lake, remembering how my grandfather once told me that this body of water was a treasure trove of local history, sacred to our region's indigenous community, vital to the ecosystem, and cherished by local fishermen. The concept of seeing it turned into some private amenity for wealthy out-of-towners sent a bitter taste to my mouth. I patted Rusty's head as if to gather courage. Soon, I turned on my heels and walked back toward the old farmhouse that had been in my family for 3 generations. I knew I had to do more than file a complaint. I had to investigate, to plan, and, when the time was ripe, to spring the trap. Still, I felt uneasy about the scope of their power. Real estate moguls, corrupt city officials, and cutthroat developers had destroyed countless communities across the country. Why would mine be spared? Yet, I also knew I had an ace up my sleeve. They had no idea who they were messing with, or what I was capable of doing if they pushed me too far. As I closed the old wooden door behind me, I whispered a promise to the memory of my father and grandfather. They won't get away with this. I'll see justice served and keep our family name protected. I allowed the door to creak shut, and with it, I shut out the sunlight, ready to delve into the darkness of legal strategies, hidden alliances, and carefully planted traps. 2 days later, I was nursing a mug of black coffee at O'Malley's Diner, the local gathering spot for ranchers, fishermen, and just about anyone who wanted a hearty breakfast. The checkered tablecloths and the smell of bacon gave me a sense of nostalgia. On the wall hung a framed photograph of my grandfather, once recognized for his efforts to protect the local wetlands. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard conversations that all led to the same topic. HOA, she's unstoppable, one man muttered to his companion, a worried look on his face. The HOA keeps hiking up fees. They're fining people left and right. They claim property boundaries have changed. Another voice chimed in. I heard she's got the mayor's ear. Apparently they're all in on it. My ears perked up at that. Corruption was a snake that slithered through small towns just as easily as big cities. Sometimes more easily, because everyone knew everyone else, and no one wanted to stand out by resisting. I raised my hand for the waitress, a warm-hearted woman named Linda. She'd known my family for decades, always treating me like her own nephew. She poured me a refill and whispered, "Be careful, Sam. These folks mean business. They ain't afraid to scare people off." I offered a small smile. "Thanks, Linda. I'm on my toes." After leaving a tip, I stepped out onto Main Street, the soft sun painting the sidewalks in patches of gold. My mind was awash with the rumors of crooked deals, forged documents, and intimidation tactics. If half of them were true, then this hotel project was just the tip of the iceberg. I decided to make a visit to City Hall. Although I wanted to keep my federal position under wraps, I could still utilize my knowledge to inspect public records. What I found unsettled me. Plans for the Lakefront Luxury Resort had been approved in record time, only 3 weeks from initial proposal to final permit. Nobody I knew had attended a public hearing because none had been advertised. There were also suspicious notes in the margin referencing Exodus clearance. I carefully photocopied every document that looked unusual. I made sure to note the signatures, the mayor, a few city council members, and even an environmental compliance officer. The officer's sign-off was shocking, especially given that our lake had protected status due to certain fish habitats. Protected status. My grandfather had spent nearly a decade pushing for that official designation, ensuring that no developer could easily degrade the lake's ecology. Yet here, in black and white, was evidence that the authorities had rolled out the red carpet for HOA's project. I felt my jaw tighten. On my way out, I noticed a small group of residents waiting outside the City Hall building. Some with placards protesting the construction, others with worried looks as they whispered about rising property taxes. They came to me, uncertain but hopeful. An older fisherman asked, "Sam, you grew up here. Isn't there something that can be done? They're building right on the shoreline. That can't be legal." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't give up. Sometimes these things look unstoppable, but they're not. Gather every piece of info you can, any weird notices, fines, or letters. We'll need evidence. He nodded, relief evident in his eyes. We've got a whole box of them. Good, I said. Hold on to those. All the while, I sensed eyes on me. I turned, and there she was. Boa herself, stepping out of a sleek, black SUV. Her posture radiated confidence, even arrogance. She wore the same mirrored sunglasses, making it impossible to read her eyes, but I felt her gaze. She acknowledged me with a nod, or perhaps a challenge, then she turned on her heel and disappeared into City Hall. A part of me wanted to confront her right there, to demand she cease her construction, but as any good strategist knows, you don't reveal your strongest card at the first move. Instead, I left quietly and returned to my farmhouse, where a trove of information awaited my meticulous scrutiny. Back home, the old farmhouse welcomed me with its creaking floors and the faint smell of cedar from the walls. Rusty bounded to greet me, tail wagging. I took off my coat and set the stack of files on the dining table, which was cluttered with decades' worth of family memorabilia. Photos, journals, and newspaper clippings documenting my grandfather's environmental crusades. I rummaged through the old wooden chest near the fireplace, the chest that once belonged to my grandfather. Inside, I found faded documents, property deeds, and an old map of the lake area. My grandfather had meticulously drawn out the shoreline's boundaries, highlighting fragile wetland zones and places where local wildlife nested. On the back of the map, in his elegant handwriting, were notes about proposed expansions from corporations even back then. He had fought them all off. One line caught my eye. Never let them take the heart of this land. It belongs to us, and we belong to it. His words stirred something within me. I felt that old familial bond, the unbreakable link to the lake and the farmland. This was more than a legal battle. It was a fight to preserve my family's identity. I spent hours cross-referencing the old map with the new construction plans I'd obtained from City Hall. As I suspected, the new hotel's footprint extended deep into the wetlands, far beyond what local ordinances would allow. I also noted suspicious mentions of wetland reclassification, as though they had manipulated the official records to downplay the area's environmental significance. Soon, the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. That night, I decided to email a trusted friend in the Environmental Protection Agency, a college classmate who'd become an expert in wetland conservation. I kept the details brief, still not revealing my official position, asking for a second opinion on the validity of reclassifying that part of the lakefront. After hitting send, I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and settled at the table, lost in thought. If this fight became public, I knew they'd try every trick to intimidate me. Would it come down to revealing I was a federal judge? Part of me hoped not. Small towns can have big gossip circles, and once word got out, it might overshadow the real issue at hand. But I also acknowledged something crucial. This wasn't just about me or my family's land anymore. Other residents were being squeezed by the HOA's fines and fees, effectively pushing them out. HOA seemed to be orchestrating a land grab, offering them pennies on the dollar for their property once they were deep in debt, then turning around to sell or develop the land at a monstrous profit. If there was ever a time to use my expertise in the law, it was now. Still, I decided the only way to make the biggest impact was to let them think they had the upper hand. So, I'd watch, gather evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. A few days later, I received a knock on my door. It was a short man in a rumpled suit, glasses sliding down his nose, clutching a worn leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Martin Rodriguez, an attorney who claimed to represent a group of concerned residents. "You're Sam Norris, right?" he asked, fidgeting slightly, his gaze darting around. "Yes," I replied. "How can I help you, Mr. Rodriguez?" He glanced nervously over his shoulder before stepping inside. "I've been hired by a handful of homeowners in the area. They've been slapped with fines for alleged architectural violations. Things like the color of their doors or the angle of their fences. It's all coming from the HOA, orchestrated by Miss Hoa." I led him to the living room. "Go on," I said, noticing how he kept fidgeting with his briefcase. "The homeowners suspect that these citations are fabricated, a tactic to force them into selling. Some are already behind on payments, struggling to keep up with rising property taxes. Meanwhile, Ms. Hoya and her associates have made them low-ball offers. It reeks of extortion." He opened his briefcase, producing copies of violation notices. "I'm building a case, but the local judges, well, they seem compromised. I can't prove it yet, but rumors are that Ms. Hoa has connections in the mayor's office and the county courts." I watched him carefully. He clearly didn't know I was a federal judge. His manner indicated he saw me only as a local landowner with an environmental bent. "I'm not sure how I can help," I said carefully, not revealing anything. He lowered his voice. "I heard you're the only person around here who's not afraid to stand up to her. Word is, you might have some clout. Honestly, we're desperate." I looked at the stack of documents. The glaring inconsistencies in the violation notices jumped out immediately. Dates that didn't match, suspicious signatories. It was classic intimidation. "Have you tried filing in federal court?" I asked, testing the waters. Martin gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's a big leap for a small-town land dispute. Besides, we don't exactly have the resources to mount that kind of legal challenge." I paused, chewing my lower lip in thought. I had a moment of revelation. If these were indeed civil rights violations, or if there were federal environmental regulations being broken, a federal venue could be appropriate.
"Let me think about it," I said. "I might have some contacts who can help." Martin exhaled, relief washing over his face. "Thank you. Anything you can do." After he left, I sat for a moment reflecting on how dire the situation was for these residents. A woman like Hoa, with unscrupulous allies in local government, could ruin lives. And from what I was seeing, she was well on her way to doing just that. I decided it was time to show that someone was willing to fight back, someone with the knowledge and the guts to see it through to the end. I grabbed my keys, hopped in my old pickup truck, and headed toward the new construction site. The construction zone was a hive of activity: bulldozers, cranes, and an army of hard-hatted workers swarming the half-built structure. The skeleton of the luxury hotel loomed over the lake, an ominous symbol of greed overshadowing the gentle ripple of the water.
I parked on the edge of the site next to a temporary chain-link fence with a no trespassing sign. Immediately, a security guard approached. "Sir, you can't park here." Ignoring the guard, I stepped out of the truck and demanded to speak with whoever was in charge. Within minutes, Hoa appeared, flanked by two stern-looking men in suits. She removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp brown eyes that sized me up. "Well, hello there," she said, her tone dripping with a practiced politeness. "You must be Mr. Norris, the man who's been asking all the uncomfortable questions." "Guilty," I replied, crossing my arms. "I'd like to know why you're building on my family's land." She cocked her head. "Your land?" "According to our records, the portion we're building on has been rezoned for commercial use and is legally acquired by the HOA for public development." "That's a lie," I said firmly. I have the original deeds. My grandfather's name is on them. We never sold an inch of this lakefront. If you think some shady rezoning can override that, you're sorely mistaken. Her lips curled into a cold smile. Perhaps your records are out of date, or maybe you're confused about the boundary lines. It happens all the time in these old towns.
I stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated. I know exactly where my property line is. You crossed it the moment you uprooted the willow trees.
Her gaze hardened. You might want to tread carefully, Mr. Norris. Disputing an HOA-approved project can be costly. Just ask your neighbors. Some have already paid substantial fines for non-compliance. I felt a surge of anger. You're strong-arming innocent people just to further your development. You think you can keep getting away with it? She shrugged, feigning innocence. We're simply ensuring the neighborhood maintains its standards, and we're expanding opportunities. This hotel will bring jobs, tourism. Everyone benefits. Everyone, I scoffed. From what I've seen, it's your cronies who stand to profit while families are forced out. Her eyes gleamed. That's quite an accusation. I'd be careful making accusations without proof. I let a small smile tug at my lips. Don't worry. I'm gathering plenty of proof. Hoa's face flickered with something. Anxiety? But it passed so quickly I couldn't be sure. She replaced her sunglasses, stepping back with calculated elegance. Do what you must, but mark my words, the project will continue. It's in everyone's best interest. As she turned to walk away, I called after her. We'll see about that. One of the suited men shoved a piece of paper into my hand. Cease and desist notice, he announced in a monotone voice. For trespassing on a private construction site. I crumpled the paper, dropping it to the ground. You'll regret this, I said under my breath, though they likely heard me. Returning to my truck, I felt a heady mix of anger and exhilaration. Hoa had revealed her arrogance. She believed she held all the cards, that she could bully me and every other resident. But she didn't know I was a federal judge, one who understood exactly how to tear down a corrupt enterprise from within. I drove off with a single thought echoing in my mind. Let her keep thinking she's untouchable. It'll make the fall that much harder. That afternoon, I met again with Martin Rodriguez and a small group of residents who had been fined or threatened by the HOA. We gathered at my farmhouse, the wooden beams and faded wallpaper serving as a stark contrast to the grim determination etched on everyone's faces. There was Mr. Albright, an elderly man who'd lived by the lake since before I was born. He insisted they'd moved his property boundary stakes overnight, and then fined him for having a shed that supposedly encroached on common ground. Next was Mrs. Carter, a single mother of two who received multiple citations for minor cosmetic changes to her home, like painting her mailbox green instead of the HOA-approved brown. She was already 2 months late on her fines, facing a possible lien on her property. One by one, they told their stories, each sounding more outrageous than the last. Hoa had systematically targeted them, especially those living on prime lakeside lots. A pattern emerged. Once the fines became insurmountable, the HOA would swoop in with a lowball offer. Some, too afraid and desperate, had already sold. I spread out the documents on the dining table. As each person recounted their troubles, Martin and I cross-referenced them with official notices, property maps, and local statutes. I could see the relief on their faces as they realized they weren't alone. Thank you for doing this, Mrs. Carter said, her voice trembling. I just want a safe place to raise my kids. They shouldn't have to worry about losing their home. I nodded, trying to reassure her. We'll fight this, but we need to be thorough. Martin chimed in. I think we have enough to show a pattern of predatory practices. The question is, can we file it in federal court? I cleared my throat. It might be possible. If there's evidence of discrimination, corruption involving state officials, or a violation of federal environmental regulations, we can make a case. But it won't be easy. HOA has the mayor and others in her pocket, so we need concrete proof.
The group exchanged nervous glances. Most of these folks didn't have the money for a drawn-out legal battle. I knew that once I revealed my own position, I could expedite certain aspects, but the timing had to be perfect.
We agreed on a plan. Martin would keep collecting official letters, notices, and any suspicious communications. Meanwhile, I would keep searching for that smoking gun, a clear link between HOA, local officials, and illegal land grabs that fell under federal jurisdiction. As the meeting wound down, I stepped outside onto the farmhouse porch with Martin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. He hesitated, as if gathering courage to ask something personal. Sam, he began quietly, why are you doing this? I mean, most people would run. You're risking a lot. Your land, your resources, your time. I gazed at the old barn in the distance. This place was my father's and grandfather's. It's my heritage. HOA is tearing apart everything this community stands for. I can't let that happen. He nodded, though I sensed he knew there was more to it. For now, I left it at that. It wasn't the right moment to reveal my robe-wearing identity. Let them think I'm just a passionate landowner with a knack for the law. Soon enough, they'd discover the truth. The following week, I attended a community forum at the town hall. The official agenda was to discuss new tourism initiatives, but everyone knew the real topic was the hotel construction. Standing in front of a podium, the mayor, an old friend of my father's, named Roger Caldwell, tried to project confidence. He insisted this resort would boost local revenues, create jobs, and attract visitors. I watched from the back row, arms folded, eyebrows raised. The mayor's words rang hollow. He tossed around phrases like public-public partnerships and prosperity for all, but the tension in the room was palpable. A line of citizens formed at the microphone, each voicing concerns about noise, environmental damage, and the shady property fine. Eventually, I made my way to the microphone. Mr. Mayor, I said evenly, I have a question about the reclassification of the wetlands. When exactly did it happen, and who approved it? He shifted uncomfortably behind his dais, avoiding my gaze. All procedures were followed, Mr. Norris. The details are on record. That's not an answer, I pressed. I've looked at those records. They're ambiguous, full of contradictory dates. So I'll ask again, who approved the reclassification, and on what grounds? There was a murmur in the crowd. The mayor cleared his throat. I believe our environmental compliance officer made that determination. I tilted my head. The same officer who signed off on the hotel's permit in record time? The mayor's cheeks flushed. He glanced at Hoa, who sat in the front row in a crisp navy blazer. Her eyes locked on me. She gave the mayor a curt nod, as if signaling him to remain firm. With all due respect, the mayor said, his voice taut, the matter is settled. If you have any further concerns, I suggest you file them through the proper channels. I exhaled slowly. I will. As I turned to leave, I heard murmurs of support from the crowd. People were waking up. They knew something was rotten here. Outside the hall, the mayor caught up to me. He motioned for me to step aside, away from listening ears. Sam, you're stirring up trouble, he said under his breath, glancing nervously around. I know your family has been here for generations, but this is bigger than you. The county needs this resort for tax revenue. We can't afford a protracted legal battle. I let out a bitter laugh. So, you're just going to let them pave over everything, including the laws meant to protect us? He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. It's complicated. There are deals in place. Deals? I echoed, incredulous. Backroom deals that line your pockets while families lose their homes? The mayor's face tightened. Watch your tone, Sam. You think I want to do this? My hands are tied.
I shook my head, disgusted. You could untie them if you wanted. You've made your choice.
With that, I walked away, leaving him standing there with a troubled expression. Outside, night was falling, but it felt like a new dawn of realization. The corruption ran deep, from the mayor's office straight to HOA's boardroom. If I was going to bring them down, I'd need more than just local codes and environmental guidelines. I'd need federal muscle. My muscle. The next morning, I sat at my desk reviewing the documents Martin had handed me. My laptop pinged with a new email from my EPA contact, my old college friend. She confirmed my suspicions. The wetlands around the lake could not be legally reclassified without extensive scientific review and public comment. None of that had been done. Smoking gun number one, I thought. I compiled all the digital files onto a secure drive. Email correspondences, questionable county approvals, and stories from residents about intimidation. My experience as a judge taught me that the best traps are laid quietly, so your prey doesn't suspect a thing until it's too late. I called Martin. I have a plan, I told him, my voice brimming with a new resolve. But first, we need to act like we're surrendering. Stop publicly challenging them, appear compliant, and let them think the heat's dying down. That's risky, Martin replied skeptically. Why the change of approach? I allowed a small smile to cross my lips, even though he couldn't see it over the phone. Trust me, we need them to feel safe. A cornered animal is dangerous, but if it thinks it's won, it'll drop its guard. Martin hesitated. All right. I'll tell the residents to stay quiet for now, not to file any new complaints. Exactly. Keep collecting every piece of mail, every threatening phone call, but do it discreetly. Once we hung up, I stared at the old family photo on my desk, my grandfather holding me as a toddler by the lakeshore. The water had shimmered in the sunlight, a place of peace and legacy. The vow I'd made to him felt heavier, but also more achievable now that I had a solid strategy. I made a few more calls, reaching out to some individuals in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I didn't reveal specifics, only that I suspected major local corruption and environmental violations. I was cagey, using coded language about hypotheticals. The response was encouraging enough. If I provided substantial evidence, they'd be eager to investigate. The final call was to the local news station. I arranged an anonymous tip, telling them a big story on HOA corruption was brewing. Just be ready, I said, altering my voice. When the time comes, you'll have everything you need for a front-page expose. It was a delicate dance. I had to keep the story from blowing up prematurely, yet ensure the press was primed to pounce when the moment was right.
A week of uneasy calm passed. The construction on the hotel continued at breakneck speed, but the residents, now coached by Martin, filed no new complaints. They took down protest signs, quietly paid the minimal fines they could, and acted as though they were resigned to the situation. It worked like a charm. Hoa relaxed. She shifted her focus from bullying locals to entertaining potential investors. Through my network of observant neighbors, I learned of a private gathering at the half-finished hotel site, an exclusive party for financiers and local officials. Under the cover of dusk, I parked my truck far down the road and approached the site on foot, slipping past the fence under a patch of tall brush. Construction had halted for the evening, and the place was bathed in artificial lights, illuminating high tables where guests sipped cocktails. I spotted Hoa in a sleek evening gown, gliding from one group to another, her laughter ringing out in the still night air. Close by, I noticed the mayor laughing a bit too loudly, talking up the economic benefits of the resort. Several men in suits nodded, swirling whiskey in crystal glasses. I took out my phone, snapping photos from a distance, trying to catch faces and overhear snippets of conversation. Environmental red tape is no longer an issue. The wetland, all sorted. Mayor Caldwell pulled the right strings. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, but I needed a smoking gun that tied it all neatly together. My heart thudded in my chest, adrenaline coursing through me. I was trespassing on private property, gathering intel. If anyone recognized me, I'd be in a precarious legal position. Well, they would think I was in a precarious position. In truth, the minute they tried to prosecute me, the entire facade would unravel because I'd reveal exactly who I was. Still, I had no intention of getting caught. I recorded a few incriminating snippets of audio. Then, just as I was about to slip away, I heard the mayor mention something about the judge. My ears perked up. Was he referring to me or possibly a local judge? I crept closer, pressing myself against a half-finished concrete pillar. The mayor was talking to Hoa. "We need to ensure the local judge doesn't interfere," he said, voice low. "I've told him it's all in the best interest of the county, but he's a stickler for the rules." Hoa waved her hand dismissively. "He's only got authority over the county courthouse. My lawyers can handle him if he tries anything. The bigger threat would be if a federal judge took notice." She let out a light laugh, raising her champagne flute. "But come on, how likely is that? This is small town stuff. No one's going to bother." A slow grin formed on my face. If only she knew, the federal judge was already here, lurking in the shadows. Quietly, I pressed the stop button on my phone's recording. I slipped back into the darkness and returned to my truck, heart pounding with triumph. They were so confident, so sure that no real authority would swoop in to check their corruption. Little did they realize I had them right where I wanted them. Back at the farmhouse, I spent 2 nights compiling all my evidence: the emails, the recorded audio, the photos from the clandestine party, and the suspicious property transfers. With each piece of data, I felt more certain that I had enough to go federal. On the morning of the 3rd day, I made the call to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This time, I introduced myself properly: Judge Samuel Norris, U.S. District Court. My contact on the other line was stunned at first, but quickly recognized the gravity of what I was presenting. "I need to recuse myself from any direct ruling," I explained, "but I can be a key witness. There's an extensive network of corruption here: local officials, unscrupulous developers, environmental fraud. I have documentation and recordings." My contact assured me they would initiate an investigation. They wanted me to remain discreet until they could coordinate a sting operation, one that would catch the conspirators in the act of violating federal law. With the wheels now in motion at the highest level, I decided it was time to orchestrate the final move on my end: a town hall confrontation that would prompt the mayor, Hoa, and their cronies to incriminate themselves publicly. I sent out word through Martin and the residents that we would hold a community meeting in the old Grange Hall by the lake. Officially, it was to discuss property concerns and environmental stewardship. In reality, it would be the scene where I'd provoke them into revealing the depths of their wrongdoing. I also tipped off the local news station, telling them to send a camera crew. That evening, Grange Hall buzzed with anxious energy. Folding chairs were set up in neat rows facing a small stage. Residents filled every seat, with even more standing in the back. On stage sat a panel: the mayor, a representative from the county environmental office, and of course, Ms. Hua, looking poised and calm in a tailored blazer. I stood off to the side, leaning against the stage. Martin stepped up to the podium first, presenting the residents' concerns. He was cautious, methodical. Then it was time for open questions. One after another, brave souls approached the microphone, detailing outrageous fines, boundary manipulations, and intimidation. The panel offered the same tired excuses: must adhere to HOA standards, building a better community, the wetlands were reclassified lawfully. Eventually, I took the mic. Ms. Hoa, you claim the wetlands were lawfully reclassified. I pulled out a file. I have environmental impact studies indicating they are still protected. Care to explain? She rolled her eyes, flipping her hair dismissively. Those studies are outdated. The county approved the reclassification months ago. I held up another document. I also have records showing the county official who signed that approval was not only under your employ, but also received financial compensation from your association. Are you denying that? A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The mayor leaned forward, sweat beading on his brow. Hoa's face flushed, but she managed a sneer. That is a baseless accusation. You sure? I continued calmly, because here's a bank statement indicating large wire transfers to that official's account traced back to an HOA subsidiary. The camera lights from the local news turned on, capturing every reaction. Hoa's cool facade cracked. Those are private business matters, she snapped. It's perfectly legal to compensate consultants. I seized the moment. Consultants for reclassifying land that shouldn't be reclassified? I let the question hang. In the charged air, the mayor rose, his voice trembling. Sam, you're out of line. I turned to him. Am I? Or are you out of line for bypassing public hearings and forging essential signatures? He paled. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I said, because I have audio of you admitting you pulled the right strings to expedite the permits for this hotel. From the corner of my eye, I saw Martin discreetly usher the local news crew closer. People in the audience shouted, demanding answers. The room erupted in chaos. At that point, Miss Hua lost her composure. You have no authority here, Norris, she shouted. This is a local matter. I took a breath. Then I delivered the line I'd waited so long to say. Actually, I do have authority. My name is Samuel Norris, and I'm a federal judge of the United States District Court. Silence crashed over the hall. Eyes widened, the mayor's face turned ashen. Hoa's jaw dropped, speechless for the first time. A stunned hush followed, broken only by the rapid clicking of cameras. I continued, everything said here tonight has been recorded. Everything you've done can and will be investigated at the federal level. So if you think you can bully people, falsify environmental documents, and seize private property without consequence, you're dead wrong. Hoa's eyes darted wildly, as though seeking an escape route. The mayor clutched the sides of his seat, looking like he might faint. In fact, I concluded, you've walked right into our trap. Federal agents have been monitoring these transactions for weeks. I can't preside over the case myself, of course, but I can and will testify. And with the evidence we've gathered, it's only a matter of time before justice is served. With those words, the dam broke. Residents cheered, some shouted their gratitude. In the midst of the uproar, I stepped aside, letting the camera crews capture the meltdown on the panel's faces. In the days that followed, federal investigators descended upon our small town. Bank accounts were frozen, county offices were searched, and subpoenas flew like autumn leaves. The news station aired the footage from that explosive meeting, and soon the story went national. Hoa was arrested on charges of fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to violate environmental laws. The mayor and a cluster of county officials faced similar charges. Their confessions and plea bargains poured in, each implicating the other in a network of corrupt dealings. Construction on the luxury hotel ground to a halt. Federal authorities slapped an injunction on the partially built structure, citing multiple environmental and legal violations. Eventually, a court order mandated the site be dismantled and rehabilitated. For the first time in months, the hum of bulldozers vanished, replaced by the softer sound of wind rustling through the grass. As for the residents, Martin Rodriguez helped file a class action suit against the defunct HOA. Many fines were dismissed or refunded. Those who lost their homes under coercion could reclaim them if they chose, or receive substantial restitution. My farmland, including the Ancestral Lakefront, was officially recognized, again, as private property with full protective status. One afternoon, I walked the shoreline with Rusty, taking in the tranquil water. I stopped at the place where the willow trees once stood. It pained me to see the stumps. But I pledged to plant new saplings so future generations could enjoy their shade. I thought of my father, my grandfather, and the legacy they left. I felt a sense of peace, knowing the land was safe for now and likely for years to come. The law might move slowly at times, but when wielded correctly, it can be an unbreakable shield for the innocent and a fierce sword against the corrupt. In the months that followed, the town began to heal. Without the cloud of corruption, local businesses found new ways to attract tourism that respected the lake's fragile ecosystem. Guided kayaking tours, eco-friendly cabins, and community-run events that showcased local crafts. The newly reformed HOA, stripped of its former power brokers, re-elected a more community-minded board. They set reasonable regulations, focusing on neighborhood beautification without harassing homeowners. Martin was appointed the HOA's legal advisor, ensuring the organization stayed on the right side of the law. As for me, I returned to my duties as a federal judge, though I kept my farmhouse by the lake. Whenever court was not in session, I'd retreat to this sanctuary, tending the land and strolling by the water with Rusty. Word spread that I lived locally, but the community treated me as they always had, kindly, respectfully, but without the fear that accompanies a judge's title. One crisp morning, I decided to host a small gathering by the lake to celebrate the replanting of willow saplings. Neighbors came with shovels and fresh seedlings working side by side. Linda from the diner brought homemade pies. Mr. Albright told stories of fishing trips from decades past. Mrs. Carter's children giggled as they played tag among the baby willow shoots, free from any fear of losing their home. And despite the joyful mood, there was a solemn undercurrent, the memory of how close we came to losing it all. Yet that memory was also what made this moment so cherished, a triumphant reclamation of our shared heritage. When the last sapling was nestled in the soil, I rose to say a few words. "Thank you all for coming," I began, pausing to let the hush of the crowd settle. My grandfather always said, "This lake belongs to us, and we belong to it." It's not just about ownership on paper, it's about stewardship. We protect it, and it protects us. Our families, our memories, our future. A gentle breeze ruffled the leaves of the young saplings, as if the land itself was acknowledging our efforts. I smiled, feeling the weight of gratitude and humility. Afterward, as people mingled and the kids splashed in the lake's shallows, a small film crew approached for a post-scandal follow-up interview. I obliged, hoping our story would inspire other communities facing similar battles. Toward the end of the interview, the reporter asked, "Any final words for those watching at home?" I turned to the camera, recalling how everything started with a single bulldozer's roar. Corruption can creep in anywhere, big city or small town, but if you stand by the truth, gather your evidence, and trust in the law, no matter how powerful the other side seems, you can prevail. Sometimes it takes a bit of cunning, sometimes a bit of faith, but justice has a way of shining through. I paused, then gave a final nod. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real stories of people fighting back, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Our voices are stronger together. As the camera lights faded, I looked out over the water. The setting sun painted the sky in vibrant oranges and reds, reflecting off the lake's surface like liquid fire. It reminded me of the resilience of this land and of its people, how we had emerged from the storm stronger and more united than before. Nearby, Rusty barked playfully, chasing after a flock of geese that took flight with beating wings. In that simple, joyous moment, I felt the warmth of a new dawn, a future where greed couldn't overshadow the legacy left to us by those who came before, and where justice indeed had the final say.